Without further ado, Mr. Kevin McGary.
All right, I'm excited to be here. I normally talk to Republican groups, and it's astounding the level of ignorance with our fellow Republicans in general. Because I say, when I talk to those groups, all right, how many Tea Partiers we have here? And I only get about half of the room. And then, I'm always struck by that. I'm like, well, these people are we just buffoons about what a Tea Partier is? And so I always go into meetings like this with, first of all, explaining that the Tea Party is not a big P party. It's a movement. It's dynamic. It's everybody's a Tea Party. If you feel that you're taxed enough already, guess what? You're a Tea Partier. So I go to my family gatherings. They say, "Oh, Kev, you all conservative." And I say, "Yeah, you a Tea Partier?" "No, man, I'm not." I say, "Yes, you are. You like paying taxes? You want more taxes?" "Well, no, of course not." "Well, welcome to the Tea Party, baby." So we need to be as practical as that with our Tea Party message. It's not because they want to label us as a big P party. And it really is not a big P party. It is a mindset and a movement. And the mindset is look, stop the government waste. That's enough. Enough of that. Give us something for our hard-earned tax dollars as opposed to just giving it away to some, third-party illegals and everybody else. If we're going to be paying taxes, let our taxes go to work. But the point is when I go to my Republican meetings, about half of the people still won't proclaim that they're of the mindset and of the movement of a Tea Partier. And I think that's a travesty. What the point is that I'm trying to get is, I see that the Tea Party movement in general, it seems to me, because I used to be invited to a lot of Tea Party meetings, and now it just, as of the past year or so, it seems to be on the decline. I don't know whether that really is true. But I think we have more work to do with our messaging and to help people understand that, look, you can be a Republican, dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and still be a Tea Partier and still be completely, 100% with what you believe. Tea Party, again, is a mindset and a movement. It's not a big deal. And it just means that we're taxed enough already. It's, am I right? Am I in the right place? Mm-hmm. Right. So we need to be better with that. But I appreciate being here. You're having me here. I get asked a lot as well. Well, what do you do? I know you're kind of a political activist. You work with Fredrick Foundation, this and that. And so one of the things that I do is I'm a technologist. So I started a company, and we specialize in health and safety applications for cell phones. How many cell phone users do we have here? Okay, pretty much everybody. And how many smartphone users? Smartphone, okay, pretty much everybody. Okay, good. So so I wanted to give you a preview. This is the only cheap, testimony or commercial I'm going to run all night. But I just want to give you a sense for where I'm going with my technology pursuits. And it is very, very relevant to each of us here, because I don't know how many people in here know exactly when they're going to have a medical emergency? The exact date, the exact time, and you know. So most people, like me, have no idea what the next minute or the next second holds for us. So if you have an extreme medical emergency, sudden cardiac arrest, stroke, any of those types of things, they can come at inconvenient times. So what we've developed is a smartphone app, and I just wanted to give you a preview of that. I'm not going to go into what that's all about. If you're interested, you can talk to me at the end. But it's something that will be coming out on the market the 1st of 2016. And this, again, is just to show you what I'm up to and give you an idea that way. Can you help me with that, Santos? Meet Josh, a 55-year-old baby boomer who apparently looks pretty fit, but in reality has high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and that deems him high risk. One day, without warning, he starts to feel some numbness in his heart. He starts to lose consciousness. Moments before passing out, he decides to activate his My Health Day app. Josh is immediately connected to 911. Simultaneously, while Josh is on the phone with 911, his friends, his family, his neighbor, doctor, and local emergency IPS location, nearest AED defibrillator device, and his doctor of emergency responders are provided with additional information like his medical history, his current heart rate, and any prescriptions that Josh may need at the moment. Within just a couple of minutes, his neighbor arrives. His neighbor takes over the 911 call and starts to administer to Josh. Emergency response arrives within about 5 minutes. They can begin to administer immediately to Josh because of all the information that was provided to them before they even came on site. At the end of the day, Josh's life is saved. His hospital stay is reduced from 30 days to 3 days, and his healthcare providers have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional medical expenses. Just in the U.S., over 1,000 people die each day from sudden cardiac arrest, not stroke, not any other causes, just from sudden cardiac arrest. Most of those people die just because we simply can't get to the exit, just because we have latency and sluggishness within the 911 calls. It may take 10 to 12 minutes for emergency response to get to people who are in medical distress. In most cases, if a person doesn't receive emergency medical attention in the first 5 to 7 minutes, they're likely to either lose their life or have long-standing permanent damage. That's the problem that we have to solve in order to save lives. My hope then is to take that existing response time down to about 3 to 5 minutes. So anyway, that's what we're doing. Is we have major problems with the 911 systems. If something happened here tonight, you try to call 911 on your cell phone, there's 55% chance they won't be able to locate you. 911 systems can't properly adjudicate location on cell phone devices. 12 to 15 minutes is too long for emergency response. So we're solving that with this app. It'll be out the first part of next year. If you want to participate in that somehow and want more information on that, I can give that to you at the end. You can see me at the end. But that's what I do. So I develop these types of smartphone applications, got one for safety and stuff like that too. So anyway, does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, so what I wanted to talk about tonight is, we have, first of all, we had some great news happen over the past 10 days. And the great news is we get a new House Speaker. Oh my goodness. I mean, this guy, Boehner was the worst of the worst of the worst. He's probably a decent man. I've never met him. But as a House Speaker, I mean, essentially Boehner and McConnell were letting this, derelict president, this tyrannical president, run roughshod over the Constitution and over we the people. And so we need, so the good news is that we get, Crybaby Boehner out, and we get to get another speaker. And I hear Jason Chaffetz or whatever, he may be, I think anybody really will be a step up from where Boehner was, quite honestly. Other than McCarthy, I think he's probably more the same, but he's probably still a little bit better. But anyway, so that was great news. That's the first step for us, hopefully helping us to reclaim the Republic. We do need to do something about McConnell as well. McConnell is just as bad on the Senate side. And so, hopefully we can start to address that. But who would have thought just several years ago that the United States of America would be in such dire straits? Who could have anticipated that we'd have our literal enemies that we elevate to be allies and our allies to be enemies? I'm really talking about the juxtaposition of Iran and Israel. I mean, this is beyond historic proportions, the kind of sea change that we've seen over the past 6 to 8 years. And it's scary. What we're going to hear a lot about as we have this president and all of his minions really take over the country and spread more of their pablum, is we're going to hear more talk about, we need more social justice. I was listening to Obama a couple weeks ago, and he said something about, really we want a society that's going to be socially just and this and that. And I'm thinking, with all that you're doing, or not doing, with all of the carnage going on around the world, and you have the audacity to wax sanctimonious talking about social justice or any kind of justice. So when we look at, when you look at the tens of thousands of Christians and homosexuals and little girls that have been maimed and horribly abused in the Middle East, and not a peep out of our White House, not a syllable out of the Pope, nothing out of our Congress, nothing out of our pulpits. What happened to the America that used to stand up for righteousness and justice? It's just, we live in an unbelievable time. And so what I wanted to talk about was, well, maybe the reason why nobody's really standing up and declaring and really, really taking a stand for what's right and for what is real justice is because, quite honestly, there's lack of definition around what justice is and what it's not. So if I were to ask you right now, can anybody here actually define social justice? I'm not going to do that because typically I do this and nobody can actually give me an actual definition for what social justice is. Because it's a made-up word. It doesn't exist in the Bible, it doesn't exist anywhere. But yet, even from a made-up word, what do we have? We have colleges, allowing students to now major in social justice. From a made-up distinction that has no, it has no roots and no bearings anywhere, we're going to allow our college students to now go and major a social justice major. Our churches are now positioning themselves to be social justice churches. I mean, what kind of buffoonery, sheer idiocy have we allowed to take us over? I mean, this doesn't make any sense by any way, shape, or form. For a word that if you were to ask any of these professors, well, what exactly is social justice? Or these, clergymen or ministers, what exactly is it that the social justice gospel you're talking about? They wouldn't be able to define it for you. So today, we're actually going to work on a little bit of history. We're going to do some definition. I actually wrote a book on this. And, hopefully it'll be enlightening for you. And I would encourage you, if you don't get all of your answers up here today, we'll do a little Q&A at the end, that you read the book and, hopefully it'll give you more clarity. But, the point is that we live in a time that is, I'm speechless about what's happening and what's going to happen in America. Normally, I'm pretty good at prognosticating and coming up with, at this rate, it looks like in a few years it'll be, honestly, I'm clueless. Because I haven't seen this level of dereliction ever in my lifetime. No, I'm a young man. Most of you guys say, oh, well, you're young. Yeah, I am. But, no, actually, I'm in my early 50s. But the point is, I have never seen this level of dereliction. It's astounding. And these are elected officials. And so, I don't really know what's happening to America or where it's going. I do know that something needs to happen, and we need a new movement, a new civil rights movement in America. Mark Levin has been talking about this. There's others that have been talking about it. We really direly need a new movement of people that will stand up for real justice. And so we're going to try to define what real justice is tonight. It's appropriate that I try to weave real justice in with history. Because I think that if we understand sort of what Abraham Lincoln, the pioneers of the Republican Party, the pioneers of conservatism, and Fredrick Douglass, sort of their relationship and what happened there, then maybe it'll give us some context. And actually, Fredrick Douglass does give us great context that actually rolls into today's justice conversation. And so after I tell you the story, and then we go into justice, and then I'll sort of go back and tell you more about what Fredrick Douglass said about this part of justice. So anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll go forward and see what happens. So did anybody know about Fredrick Douglass? Anybody? Okay, we have a few people that understand. Okay. So I'll give you the short story. I won't, belabor it, but we'll try to give you enough of context about who he was. He was the quintessential American patriot. He suffered and endured probably more than anyone as far as a historical figure that has ever come around. So he is a quintessential American patriot because he took all of that he endured and turned it into good. And at the end of his days, completely reconciled with the white race, the slave masters, and all the people that were doing such harsh damage to him over the years. So I'll tell you a little bit about his story. So Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. So he didn't know freedom. He was just born into it. When he was born, they would take the kids and they would sequester them. They'd take them immediately from their parents, sequester him, and so he was raised by what he called his grandmother. It was probably his biological grandmother, but it could have been some other elderly woman that just had all these slave kids and sort of just kept them in this one area of the plantation. And so when it was time for him to be sold, there was this new couple, and it was actually a good thing that he was sold to this couple because they never had slaves before. So he was sold into this family, and she really, the house mother really wanted a playmate for little Tommy. And so she brought little Freddie, little Tommy, and so the boys got along from day one, just hit it off real well. Fredrick was probably 6 or 7. And so at that age, they don't really do slave labor. They just kind of bring you into the environment, and hopefully you'll get along with the kids in the house, and then later you'll start to do more work. So anyway, one day the house husband came home and saw that the house mother was actually teaching little Tommy and Fredrick to read. And so he says, well, what are you doing? You can't wait. And she says, I'm just teaching little Tommy to read, and then Freddie's here teaching him to read too. He says, no, you can't do that with slaves. Once they learn how to read, then they can become free. And so Frederick Douglass heard this very, very early on, and was like, oh. So whether I'm in bondage with chains and all of that or not, if I could just learn to read, that's the key to freedom. So he actually mastered reading. What he did, the house mother never taught him to read anymore with Tommy. She just, And so what he did is he felt it was divine. In the middle of the night, 3 to 4 a.m., he felt that he was inspired by God to go down into the study and pick up the Bible and pick up things and start reading. So he would read. And he taught himself to read. He says, sort of the Spirit of God taught him to read. And, okay, I'll give him that. Because we know that God can do that. So he's sort of self-taught. And then as he grows up, he becomes a really great speaker. And he then starts to teach slaves how to read the Bible. That was his sort of code word. But really he was teaching slaves to read because he knew that was the key to freedom. Point is that he was an education advocate from the very beginning. After he sort of heard that from the slave master, he knew that the way that we can perpetually break the chains of slavery is we have to be educated. Because even if our slave masters want to hold us down or enslave us to grow foods or whatever it is on their properties, if we at least know how to read and reason, we can ultimately find our way out of this situation. And so for him, it actually did manifest that way. Because when he became in his early teens, then mid to late teens, he tried to escape a few times. He was beat a few times within the inch of his life. But he did survive those beatings. And he did ultimately escape. He escaped and went up north to New York. Because they, up in the northern states, obviously, in those times, they didn't have plantation living, so to speak. And slaves, or even blacks, were being freed in the north. And so he ran up north, went to New York, worked there for a little bit, and then they started, through the Northern Slave Acts, or they started reclaiming some slaves, even as far north as New York, so he went up to Boston. And then ultimately they started reclaiming slaves as high as Boston, and then he became, believe it or not, in the 1800s, an escaped black slave became an honored guest of England for 2.5 years. So they put him up, they put him on a ship, they took him over there in England, the country, made him an honored guest of the country, and so he was, he just did a lot of writing and speaking and orating in England. So So then, after about 2.5 years, the folks that he was living with in the north, in Boston, they actually acquired his freedom. They went back to the slave masters and said, look, we want to buy Frederick Douglass's freedom because we want to bring him back. They brought him back. He was a free man then. And so then he started writing. He was an entrepreneur. He started his business. It was the North Star newspaper. It was the first African-American newspaper, first black-owned newspaper. And he was actually a rather profound publisher. It was very successful. His estate at the time of his death, in today's dollars, worth about $30 billion. So he did very, very well. And he had the off chance to meet Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln had heard about him, heard about his writings, heard about his speeches, and like that. So he actually showed up at one of Lincoln's events and asked Secret Service, hey, Frederick Douglass going to meet Abraham Lincoln. It was almost just like that. And they said, who are you? You imagine, 1800s, black man, going to Secret Service, hey, I want to meet, this profound president. So he said, can you just tell President Lincoln that Frederick Douglass is here and would like to meet him? Well, it just so happens that Lincoln had heard about Frederick Douglass. And oh yeah, bring him in. No, Frederick Douglass, yeah. So they brought him in. And so they had a great conversation. And from there, they started a friendship. And then Lincoln gave him the inside scoop on the Emancipation Proclamation. So Lincoln says, hey, this is what I'm working on, Emancipation Proclamation, this and that. And so we're going to take it to Congress and we're going to get and he says, oh, wait. You're going to do what? And he says, yeah, we're going to, this is Emancipation Proclamation. I'm going to, give it to Congress and we're going to get this. And he says, well, wait, you can't do that, Mr. Lincoln. He says, their Congress was just as dysfunctional in the 1800s as it is today. He says, if you do that, we're going to have multiple generations of slaves being killed, maimed, lynched in the whole bed because they're not going to approve it. He said, this is the single most important executive order that you can ever do. So you have to do it through executive order. So actually Lincoln did this through executive order because of the encouragement and admonition of Frederick Douglass. Know that. But it was Douglass who sort of pushed him on this issue. And that's why we had Emancipation Proclamation go in as an executive order. So, and as it turns out, historically, it is the single most important executive order that has ever taken place in our history. So they had a great friendship, and Frederick Douglass was then not only Lincoln's inner circle, but for 4 other Republican presidents, he was in those inner circles as well. He was also an ambassador, a bank chairperson, just a number of other things, and just an incredible, incredible man. And at the end of life, he had actually married another escaped slave, and they had a couple of kids. At the end of life, and she died of cancer, at the end of life, he actually married a white woman. So when I talk about reconciliation, this guy's the quintessence. It shows you the circle of how, if you live with dignity, you live with integrity, you go through life's changes. Yes, the very same people, an entire race of people that held you down and enslaved you. At some point, we have to grow up and have the capacity to forgive. And Frederick Douglass really firmly demonstrated that to us. Again, he married a white woman at the end of life, and then they remained happily married until he died. So, and if that's not the perfect example of how, racists can reconcile, that's just a great story and a great example. That's a short summation of his life. What's important about the GOP and conservatives back in those days is that they saw people, or at least Abraham Lincoln did, and his 4 subsequent Republican presidents did, they saw people of color as important, and especially those that could lend to their platforms. They didn't shun, Douglass away and say, well, we got this, and your input is probably not. They brought him into the table and got his input, and like that. Now, the Republican Party today, and I know because I've met Ranks and a lot of folks in Washington and stuff like this, they don't really see it that way. They think they have all the answers, and what do we have? Last 2 elections, we had McCain and Romney, and we had the establishment class within the GOP running those campaigns, and it was a disaster. And we have an avowed Marxist in the White House, and we couldn't have a businessman beat a guy with zero track record who was an avowed Marxist, and that would be Romney and Obama last election. So much for the supposed wisdom of the GOP. I really don't have a whole lot of respect for the establishment class within the GOP, but that's just the track record speaks for itself. So that's why. But the other thing that is going to be sort of opposing us as we go forward as conservatives is this whole message about social justice. So we need to talk about what that is and what it's not. What I did within this book, when I started on this project, I wanted to go to the actual social justice, racial justice, and human rights websites. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to see how they defined justice, how they define justice with those respective clauses. And the reason why that's so important, and a lot of people may not know this, so I'll tell you what has happened historically since the time of the 1800s. We had Hitler, we had Mao, we had Lenin, we had Stalin, we have all of these despots. They had one thing in common. You know what that is? They all proclaimed that their cause is for justice. It's a fact. Hitler, back when in the early 1900s, he had people with placards when he had his public forums in the public square in Germany. They were marching around with "Hitler is for social justice." This is not a new distinction. This has been around for a while. So we have these nefarious, fascist, commie types that have basically hijacked this term long time ago and established it for the purpose of manipulating the people. So this is something we have to understand about these terms. Those terms are still being used to manipulate the people today. Well, you're not for social justice. How could you not be for social justice? How could you not be for justice? How could you not be for human rights? How could you not be for racial justice? I mean, everybody's for it. Let's look at what the definition is. Let's talk about specifics about what your cause is. So that was the first interesting thing. I didn't know that when I started researching this book and started writing it, that justice has been manipulated and abused as a term for almost, over 100 years. And so I went to these websites, and I basically took their term for what justice is, what their cause is, and I distilled it down into a sort of a singular soundbite. So I took all of their specific definitions from their sites and their paraphernalia, and took that term, how they defined what they did and what they stand for, and distilled it into a single definition. And this is what it came out to be. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but not much. Basically, justice, as it's defined by, remember, liberal human rights, social justice, and racial justice organizations in America today, boils down to the right for someone to merely exist side by side with us. Okay. Now, if you actually take the term for how they defined it, you'll see very clearly they don't stand for what they defined. So some of you may not get that, so let me explain why. And actually, here's the other thing. The only people that stand for justice in the way that they define justice are conservatives and Republicans. It's a fact. It's a fact. We don't even have to debate it. If we had an opportunity to debate it with our liberal friends, we could stand on the fact that we're the only ones that stand for justice. And you, my friend, you do not. Well, how could you say that? What are you talking about? Well, if justice is defined, and I believe it is, I believe that's actually a good definition. The right for someone to merely exist side by side with us. Then how do we explain what we're doing with all the abortions? How do you reconcile that then? how do you tell me that what this really is as a human rights, social justice, and racial justice is just the ability for me to exist side by side with another human being, and yet we decline them the right to merely exist? A right that our founders had right when they wrote the Declaration and the Constitution. The first thing they wrote was, in the Declaration, preamble to the Declaration, you have a right to life. First and foremost, that's the first principle. Life, and then liberty and pursuit of happiness. Are you kidding me? Then they wrote it into the Constitution in the 14th. No man shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. So, I mean, our founders and framers absolutely had the concept of justice nailed. They always get, there's always liberals piling on to them about, well, there were a bunch of slaveholders, isn't it? I get it. Some of them did have slaves and all of that, and that was cultural and all of that. I'm not making excuses for them. It was a deplorable thing. But the fact is those same men were used to actually author the Declaration and Constitution in the way that they were, that would allow then slavery to end. So we can't, And also, it's a fact by virtue of the way that they wrote in the Declaration and Constitution that justice really is something that can prevail in America if we just do what those documents say. So, fundamentally, if we are pro-abortion and or we support people that are pro-abortion, then by definition, it's not Kevin's definition. I'm not being sanctimonious up here. I'm just going the definition of the prevailing definition of by definition, we are unjust. We cannot claim that we're people that are standing for justice. So I also went to these websites and saw who they give to, primarily and fundamentally. And it's all liberal. So really what we have people that are social and political activists. And that is very different from justice advocates. What we need in America are people who would really stand for justice. Who will really stand for those that are unborn, that really deserve just the right to merely exist. And so I bring this up to my pastor friends and clergy, and we go out and we talk to them. I'm taking them to task on this stuff, and they say, well, wait a minute though. What about, just the poor and this and that? And I say, okay, you want to bring up the poor? You really want to go there? Yeah, okay. And so I do an exercise with them. I'm going to do it with you. So what I do is I say, okay, get in your, I ask them, okay, close your eyes. Now get in your mind's eye. The poorest of the poor. Come up with a caricature in your mind of the poorest of the poor person you could imagine on the planet. And I'm not going to go do it interactive with you, but you guys will probably have that person in your mind, and you can envision that person. And then I ask them, okay, describe that person to me. And most of the time it's, 50, 60-something Vietnam vet on the side of the road with a cart, and he's all jacked up, and, missing limbs, and there's nobody to take care of him, and this and that. I said, okay. I said, so let me ask you, if that's the poorest of the poor that you can come up with, what if you had somebody not in that age range, but what if you had them younger, like 15? And they're still missing limbs, and they're still, they got a cart in front of them. Would they be poorer than the guy who's in his 50s? And if you were honest with yourself, you'd probably say, yeah, because the one in his 50s, he's at least made it through life. He's got the capacity to get some help, and veterans, other things. He probably has the 15-year-old, the 10-year-old kid who has no parents, and they don't know where to start. So I said, okay, so if that younger one is then poorer than the caricature of So what if that is not the 10-year-old, but what if it's a 1-year-old? Would the 1-year-old be poorer than the 10-year-old? Who's poorer than your first caricature? I said, because remember, the 1-year-old, in that same situation, let's say the 1-year-old is missing an arm and a leg, just wobbling on the street somewhere. Can't even talk. But yet in the same condition as these other two. Who's poor? The 1-year-old. And then I say, so there's a pattern here. Because if the 1-year-old is that poor, and he's poor because he doesn't have a voice, and basically society he's just got to take whatever he gets, then what about the one in the womb who has absolutely no voice? None whatsoever. And whatever happens to he or she has no way to improve their condition whatsoever. It's unilateral, it's judgment, it just happens. Whatever happens to them. So who's the poorest of the poor? You guys get where I'm going? Yeah. The poorest of the poor is in the womb. I mean, if we say that poor means those who are put upon, who can't improve their condition, who have no capacity to, then that has to be by default the poorest of the poor. So, how do we take care of the poorest of the poor and give them justice? We allow them to live. And we certainly don't butcher them and harvest their parts and sell them to the highest bidder and do these things and stand behind organizations that do these things. So the point is that we as Tea Partiers, we as conservatives, we as Republicans, we have the message of justice on our side. But I think we've been missing how to articulate it in a way that can bring our liberal friends along with us. We have, if we're going to stand for justice and righteousness and goodness, then it starts here. Justice begins in the womb. It begins in the womb. And if we won't stand for justice where it starts, we can't declare that it's this 50, 60-year-old man who's in a horrible condition. But this is where justice starts. No. Dr. Martin Luther King had a good quote, and I use this to pivot in the book as well. His quote was, "Injustice anywhere, leads to injustice everywhere." I'm paraphrasing. You guys are probably familiar with that. So if we leapfrog the life issue to try to declare, no, justice actually begins here. Now, these people are living, we can actually help these people while we ignore there. Injustice anywhere. That means you have to embrace justice at the core of where it is, where it starts, in order to proclaim that you're a justice advocate. You can't ignore that, give to Obama and all the liberal, Hillary and all, and then say, oh yeah, and I'm for justice. Well, how do you do that? You're standing for people that are fundamentally unjust by your own definitions, and then you're trying to declare that you're a justice advocate. You're a hypocrite and a liar. No disrespect, but that's what you are. And so what I've been getting people to do is just own up to what you are. It's okay if you're hypocritical about this. Not to me, but if you can live with it, okay, fine. But don't declare to me, don't be sanctimonious and talk about social justice and racial justice, human rights, Black Lives Matter, and all this crap when you ignore the fundamental of it. I tell them, get the heck out of here with that. Because I know better. So, and that's how we have to be just that strong about this issue. It's a major issue. They've already tried to paint us as racist and Neanderthals and all these extreme, descriptions. And then now they're trying to say, well, you just don't like a black man, all this other foolishness that we've had to deal with over the past 6, 7, 8 years. it's important that we know that we are the ones that are for goodness and righteousness and justice. And so this book will help hopefully put some legs under you and give you the capacity to stand on this. I mean, I tell people all the time, look, I'll debate anybody, anytime, anywhere, any place, you name it, on the subject. Because I know I'm right. And I'm not knowing that I'm right because I'm just, I'm all that. No, because it's foundational, so I bring in scripture in there as well. It's practical. It's based on their own descriptions. I won the argument even before we start. There's nothing that you could say that would justify a liberal mindset as it relates to justice. It just doesn't work. Not because I say it doesn't work, but it doesn't work because your definition. It just doesn't work. So anyway, I would encourage us. Now, I told you I wanted to connect back to Fredrick Douglass. So this is what happened. Who was the pioneer? Who was the women's rights pioneer back in the 1800s?
Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony. So all this Margaret Sanger crap is just that, it's crap. Susan B. Anthony started the women's rights movement in the 1800s. She was simpatico with Fredrick Douglass. They met, they were friendly. And so she asked him a very important question. She says, okay, well, so she was delivering. I don't know, a lot of people don't know that abortions were happening back in the 1800s. So what would happen is these slave women would get impregnated by their slave masters, and the slave master wanted to get rid of the problem because, the wife in there, and then the baby comes out, and it's kind of uncomfortable, I can imagine. But so so they take him to get, however abortion would work in those days. It was probably quite scary and barbaric. But nevertheless, so Susan B. Anthony was taking these women who were going to these back alley abortion areas, or plantation alley abortion areas back in those days, pull them out of there and rescue them. And then she said to Fredrick Douglass, she says, okay, look, I'm all with, saving lives and not doing, the abortions, but I do hear about in the instances of rape and incest. So we hear that today. Well, okay, well, you're just taking away women's rights. What about rape and incest? So here's what Fredrick Douglass said. Now, mind you, Fredrick Douglass was beat horribly. He was treated probably the worst that anybody could be treated back in those days. He went through some horrible things. If you read this biography, you get it. But she asked him, she says, well, so should we make exceptions in the case of rape and incest? And he said, Susan, if we made exceptions like that for rape and incest, and we aborted kids, I wouldn't be here. See, the other part of Fredrick Douglass' story is that he was a product of his mother being raped by a white plantation owner. So he was mixed race, right? And he said, so not only would I not be here, but, there was several 100,000, right, in southern slaves in those days. He said, the majority of us wouldn't be here. Rape and incest? So you had slaves, and they didn't know that they were cousins, and all of this kind of stuff going on. So if we made exceptions, the majority of us wouldn't be here. And if you ask us to a person, we tell you that we actually have it better than those who actually get aborted in the womb. And he told her, while we are slaves, the poorest of the poor is not us. It's the ones that don't even get to come out of the womb. Fredrick, in the 1800s, he was saying this. So, which if we're going to learn anything from our, people like that who lived a lifetime before us, honorable as it was, he nailed it back in the 1800s. So I just wanted to sort of connect the dots about republicanism, conservatism, and justice. We have justice on our side. As we go into 2016, we should look to support and endorse and encourage someone who's really for justice. If they're mealy-mouthed on the Planned Parenthood issue and they, well, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't think that's a good candidate. That's not a just candidate. So candidates like that, which we don't have too many on the Republican side. Goober Graham strikes me as one that's kind of wishy-washy that way, we need to, if we're going to stand for justice, if we're going to stand for righteousness, we're going to stand for people that are going to reflect us, then we need to vote and support for people who will truly reflect us. I think that's all I had for you tonight. I do have some minutes. How long do I have for Q&A?
As long as you need.
Oh, okay. So if you want to hear any more of this story, I got a lot more I could bring out and stuff like that, or if you have some questions about the book or about whatever, let's just talk about it. Floor is open. Yes?
You know what I always get from people that are going to have an abortion? It's not a child yet, it's a fetus. It couldn't live,
Right.
so we're not killing the child.
Right.
They don't make the distinction.
Right.
However, if they saw one of those abortion videos, they can see a 3-month-old pregnancy actually moving away from the instruments in the womb.
That's right.
But they don't want to see that.
Right, so what I also capture in here is specific scientific evidence. So, a lot of you don't know, Bernard Nathanson, who was the one who was the doctor who went before the Supreme Court, he was the one that actually got Roe and Wade and to be, for the Roe v. Wade decision. He was the one that got Roe, I guess, or whatever part of that. But he was an abortion doctor. He thinks, by his own estimation, he aborted 80,000 babies. So in the early 70s in Illinois. So here's the point. But he pivoted. When they came out with sonograms and ultrasound, he said, oh my God, I've been killing babies. He thought that there were just fetuses, this tissue was no big. Even though he would see it sort of developed coming out and all that. But when he saw it on sonogram, it was clear to him. And from that moment, he became pro-life. Now this is a man steeped in it. He was the one who actually, he and his friend, actually were the ones who said, we need to develop a cliche to manipulate women, to have them hold on to this cliche for dear life if they ever get, somebody tries to talk them out of an abortion. And that cliche is held on to for dear life with women today, developed by two men, to manipulate. And that cliche is woman's right to choose. Bernard Nathanson, a man, developed that to manipulate women. It's strange. You can't get any stranger than that. But anyway, to your point, so scientists actually, because of technology, since Roe v. Wade, they actually say there is a complete, separate, distinct life at conception. Life begins. It's scientifically proven. I have more facts and figures in the book that you can take to women who are unsure about this. Last week, I don't know if you heard it or saw it, but Luis Gutierrez was asked, okay, so what do you call that thing that has a heartbeat and a brain and is, formed in the womb and all? So what is that? And he said, it's not human. Luis Gutierrez. They asked Pelosi the same thing, and she said, I'm not going to answer that. I'm not, you're trying to trick me. I'm not going to answer. So the thing about the not human nomenclature is, if you recall, Dred Scott, Plessy Ferguson, and those cases back then. I'm mixing up cases, but the whole idea behind enslaving blacks were they're not human. The justification for Hitler and Nazis, or the Jews, as they were exterminating over 6 million of them, was they're not human. And we have the exact same distinction being now played out with liberals about these unborn babies. They're not human. So it's just really bizarre when you look at a history. You look at it's just the connection points are just amazing. And yet we sit by idly again and watch this, right? Almost 60 million babies, almost 60 million, exterminated. So, but yeah, so the scientific thing is good. Yeah, you have one?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think every junior high school, middle school, and high school student should have to see films of actual abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, it would change so fast.
Yeah. It should. But, they reject seeing those films. And so the people who created those videos for us, for the human parts stuff, somebody did a compilation and sent it to Congress. And sent it to Congress and all of the aides for the Congress people in both chambers. But they especially targeted the Democrats. And they said, we have just a compilation, it's only about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever it was. Please come see. They had 3 Democrat aides. That's it. The Democrat Congress people do not want to see this. They know what it is. They know what it is. And so this is just pure evil. I mean, we support this. It's pure evil. There's no, I don't know, what other terms can you use? I mean, you got to call evil evil. So. Yes, please.
Douglas descendants, did they start your organization? Have you met them? Are they in politics? I'd like to know about the descendants.
Yeah, so they're not.
I'd like to meet them.
Yes. So he has a granddaughter that's here in California. She's not in politics. She did, I think, sort of oversee one of the Douglas biographies, but she's not involved in politics. She did give us her imprimatur for starting the Fredrick Douglass Foundation, so that was important. But they're not that active. They're not active, as I understand it.
And is she the only one?
That's the only one I'm aware of. But he has more descendants. I just don't. I personally don't really know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, please.
I just want to announce that we have the director of a Woman's Friend that's a pregnancy resource center here tonight, and they're having a fall fundraiser, and it's inside the bulletin.
All right.
She's right there.
Great segue. And if we're committed to life, we need to. Okay, there you go. All right, awesome. Hopefully, did any of this make sense to you? Okay, good. Questions? Some more? You guys don't have any more questions about Douglas' life history? Okay, yes.
Political note, you might say, is there any one candidate you would put forward that would meet some of these basic requirements for justice?
Yeah.
Personally, my wife and I were supporting Dr. Ben Carson.
Yeah.
Because requirements for justice.
Yeah.
That's all.
Dr. Carson actually is a friend of mine. I was telling somebody earlier. We had we live in Hayward, but we have a place where these national political figures come and do their fundraisers. So we actually had Dr. Carson and about 150 people meet him and spend time with him, spend about 3.5 hours with Dr. Carson and his wife Candy. So they're personal friends of ours now. I was also at the convention, at the debate in Cleveland, and I was with him last weekend, or weekend before last at the Values Voter Summit, yeah, by FRC. So he's a friend of ours. We like him. When they approached me and they said, "Look, we want to do a fundraiser. Can you host it?" I said, "Great." I told him though, I mean, this is your first time out. I don't know how far you're going to go, but I will lend you support. I'll help you. But I mean, I really, really thought that there's no way he's going to get past, a few months. He's number one. It's amazing. Now, my only hesitation was he's never been involved in politics, which of course that's a positive now. But then I thought about the national security, with all of the crazy, chaotic mess that Obama's breeding. I thought, how could you I don't care if you are a brain surgeon, you need to be a double, triple brain surgeon and take care of all this craziness in the Middle East. But he's smart enough to know that all he has to do is have smart people around him, and he can do it. So, but he's a good man. Rand Paul is a personal friend of ours and our family as well. He stayed with us a couple of days. He and his wife, Kelly and little Robert. So they're personal friends of ours. I like Rand too, but he's so far down in the polls, I don't think he's going to be able to rise back up. But so I like those two. I like Cruz. I think Cruz is solid. And I like, let's see, 1, 2, 3. And those are really my top 3. The second tier would be probably Fiorina and Trump and Rubio. But I have as far as, Christie or Goober Graham or any of the others, I have no respect, or, Jeb, they would be a disaster. So, yeah.
I think Mr. Douglas could have used the hairstyles.
Oh, absolutely. Man, I don't know whether they had barbers back in those days or would they not allow him, but he needed some help right there. Yeah.
What kind of inroads are the pro-life ministers able to have influence within their larger congregation, with their fellow ministers and so on? I don't detect, of course, I don't have my nose to the ground all the time, that there is a strong movement within church communities. I don't see the expansion of wanting to confront this as a terrible civil rights.
Yeah. The response in the church has been pathetic. When I get with my pastor friends, and I just talk straight to them all. I just tell them, look, man, you guys are on this issue, you're derelict and reprobate. There's no other terms I can come up with. On this issue. I'm not saying they're completely out of their mind, but on this issue, how could you ignore it? How could you ignore the thousands of Christians that are being slaughtered, raped, maimed, homosexuals thrown off roofs? Nothing from the pulpit. Well, what kind of world do we... nothing. So you don't hear anything about the human parts, baby part harvesting. You hear nothing about the carnage in the Middle East. Nothing from the pulpit these days. What's going on here? You know what I'm saying? So, I don't have a good answer for that. Over here.
You need to come to our church Saturday night or something.
Okay, good.
Right here.
This church talks about it?
Oh, yeah.
All right, awesome.
We hit it right on the head.
Awesome.
We pick Planned Parenthood, we take action.
Awesome, there you go. We need more churches like that.
There's a few, but not enough.
Not enough. And, quite honestly, the churches that I, surround myself with, that we're trying to do the majority of the work, are ethnic churches, communities of color. And those are the ones that are especially derelict. And the reason is because they have I think they're cowardice as well. Because they have a high percentage of post-abortive members in their churches. And so they don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to stand firm on that. They don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable, because then that's potential tithe and offering and all that if that person leaves. Right? So a lot of these pastors are trying to protect their backside, and I think that's part of the cowardice. And I don't think pastors should be that way. You got the Word of God. That's what you stand on, and come hell or high water. That's it. It is what it is. But black churches, especially the ethnic churches, have been derelict in tackling the tough subjects, and derelict in tackling all of the policy issues coming out of D.C. from this administration. So I actually tell them, I said, look, you've elevated government, and you've emasculated the gospel. And it's terrible. It's terrible what our pastors and clergy have done with this president in particular. They've been especially derelict. Yeah, please.
I wonder how many in here drove down E Street in Marysville, 10th Street, across the bridge, through Yuba City, I don't know how far out, on Calusa Avenue, even starting out as far as Olivehurst, people were literally lying no further apart than this. I believe if they held their hands out there, they could join hands the whole way through on abortion, against abortion.
It's good to come to these communities up north. Reading is another good northern community that has great, principled conservatives, principled Christians that stand on the principles of the gospel and the Bible. But it's sad when you go to our, especially our inner cities that are already being completely overrun by liberalism and secular humanism and tyranny, and these pastors they're afraid. And so I say that they're useless. Why are you even trying to pretend like you're light when you won't let the light shine the positive message about the gospel? You could save some lives if you would, but they just, it's sad and pathetic. But anyway, yes, sir.
I think the Apostle Paul hit the nail on the head when he prophesied 2,000 years ago to Timothy, knowing this also Timothy, that in the last days men would be lovers of their own selves, and he has a whole list of symptoms that go along with that, but lovers of their own self. We've asked young people, middle-aged, older people to come to these meetings. We've brought 2 so far. They came once.
That was it.
Come again, because they're living a good life, and that's all they care about.
That's all they care about. Self-centered, yeah. That's a symptom of society. And it's sad that, yeah. Any others? Yeah, please.
You haven't mentioned, well, you did mention that the reason this Holocaust is going on is because we don't consider unborn babies as being human.
Right.
And I believe a large part of that is because of the teaching of evolution.
Yeah, it's all secular humanist in nature, right? So, I think the evil emanates from that side and just perpetuates itself, right? So, yeah, and no doubt about it that it's part of, Darwin's, somewhere along the line, some of his thinking and lineage of thoughts that really cloud people's perception about, well, is that really a life yet? That's not really a life. It can't be, survival of the fittest because it's not even out. That sort of mixed up, illogical logic, right? Yeah, good point. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's you.
Don't
Yes.
you think that social justice is being defined as being politically correct today? And what that means is taking our culture out and moving theirs in. And we got to stop it. This is America.
That's right. That's right. Good. Great point. Thank you. So here's the thing about social justice. When I do ask, and I take pastors through workshops, and I say, okay, we're just going to be boys here. So what I bring them into my house, and I say, we're going to take the titles off. And I don't care if you're a bishop or doctor. I'm going to call you Rob. You call me Kevin. We just sit down and we just chop it up, right? And so I say, what is social justice? And so we start to just have some dialogue about that. And at the end of the day, what it is fairness. Fairness is defined as sort of having everything like everybody else. And so, first of all, I challenge them. I say, now, is God fair? And I ask that question. And I wait and I pause. And I'm asking you, and you guys are thinking about it too right now. Is God fair? God is not fair.
No.
He is not fair. If you define fair as having everything like everybody else, he's not. He is just. He's a just God. And also, the nomenclature in the Bible has nothing. You can't find fair in the Bible. It doesn't exist. Oh, it's one place. Song of Solomon, when he was saying, "You are fair, my love, thy skin is..." That's the only place. I searched it. It was the only place where fair was. So there is no distinction for fair or fairness in the Bible. Furthermore, to show you that God is not fair as in we all have everything in common, how do you explain, I'll give you a comical one first and then we'll go to more practical. When I was growing up, Michael Jordan was the man, right? 6'6", and just was leaping out of the gym, right? It's just unbelievable talent. And I would look at him and I would really actually get mad. Quite honestly, I was mad at God. I was like, that is just completely unfair. How is it that I'm 6'2" and I could barely get 2 inches off the ground and this guy's leaping out the gym at 6'6"? How is it you didn't give me any of that talent? I was sincere with it, sort of like, like, God, this is crazy, this guy. If he was fair, we'd all be Michael Jordans, right? We'd all have this similar capability. We'd all have skill sets that were like that. The fact is, or let me give you one more practical. This can probably hit home with some of you. I have the privilege of seeing my parents reach in their 80s. They're still married and all, they're together. They're going into their 80s. I have friends. Their parents died when they were in their teens. There are some people that their parents died right when they were born. They never knew them. How is a fair God as if we have everything in common and the same? How are you going to classify that as fair? God is not fair. Actually, so I'll give you, I explain this in fine detail in the book, but I'll give you the short story. Where did this whole idea of fairness come from? It actually started from the beginning of the beginnings. No, before even that. Lucifer. This is what he was a worshiping angel, right? So he'd invite all the angels to come before God and worship and all of that. Then at some point he started looking at himself and thought, man, I'm the worshiping angel. I'm really the man. I'm really the one running the show up here. Why am I? It's not fair that I bring all of the angels, all of the host in for the Most High God when I shall ascend. I will. It was his distinction. It's not fair that he has all of the power and authority and all of the glory, and I have nothing. So he rebelled based on fairness. It's demonic, folks. It is demonic. And I connect the dots in the book. You read it. It is fundamentally a demonic notion to demand fairness as if you have everything like everybody else. It's demonic. If you listen to agnostics and atheists, their primary justification for being agnostic and atheist is there's no God. Because, clearly, we've got people that die at young ages. You have tsunamis over in Asia. You have this. There's no. If God really existed, he would be fair. He'd give us, you have people starving in this country and that. You've got people that are. So there cannot be a God because it's the world is too unequal. Honestly, if you talk to your atheist and agnostic friends, take them through that and say, well, why do you think? And they say, well, God can't exist because it's just too unfair, too unequal across the world. It's the same thing that Lucifer said. Oh, it's not fair. I need to have my own kingdom. I need to be equal. I need to, and so therefore I will, and I will, and I will. So it's purely a demonic notion, and yet we have clergy, churches, saying they're a social justice church, advocating fairness. And so I also take you to the specific instances in the Bible that firmly declare that God is not a God about fairness as if we're having all things in common in that way. Because he puts in each and every one of us very specific assignments, skills, and abilities. And he does it, and there's a couple parables that Jesus did that really points it out. Parables of the talents. If God was indeed a commie, or Jesus was a socialist, which, people like Jim, what's his name? Jim,
Out of Chicago.
huh?
Out of Chicago.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. He says, Jesus is socialist. If they were, he wouldn't use this parable when he gave one talent, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 1, 5, and then one with, when he gave. So, and at the end, basically, he curses the one with the one who buried the talent. So what God wants from each and every one of us is for us to bear fruit, much fruit. To use the specific talents, skills, and abilities that is unique to us. That he put in us very specifically. And if God's going to do that specifically to everybody on the planet, then everybody has a very, very different assignment. And you can't equate fairness as we would equate fairness in that context. It won't work. So fairness is a term for rebellion and demonism and manipulation. And what we want is justice. God is a God of justice. And I want to encourage us to vote for people who stand for justice. Amen. Amen. I invite you that if you want my books, I have a few back there. They're $15. I'll be signing them if you want to. And if you want to engage me with any of the other conversations about my health app or anything else, I'll be in back for a while. Oh, you got one?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The notion of what the president is doing, and has been all of his social justice advocates, of critical race theory.
Yeah.
And how in the last 4 years of his term, that's exactly what he's employing, which leads to white privilege, all the other notions that are out there. How can we best address that with our population now? The whole notion of social justice and institutionalized racism and that sort of thing.
Good question. So,
Can you repeat it? What did you say?
Can you?
No.
It was a question of
One
genius.
sentence.
No.
Not a paragraph.
Listen, I figure I have 2 hours to speak now because I have the microphone. Are you kidding me? I'm asking the question about critical race theory, Derek Bell's critical race theory. This was the notion, or is the notion, that because white men created the Constitution, government, and so on, the institutions that sprung forth from that are all inherently racist because of the structure that they were brought and built and structured by white people. That's the question. The question is, because Obama embraces critical race theory, he has the history of Derek Bell and all these other individuals, and going forward, and it was found out by Breitbart, you've heard me talk about this, Breitbart found out that was going to be the agenda for the last 4 years, and unfortunately Andrew Breitbart died. Anyway, but I was asking, how do we combat critical race theory now, because what we have is a situation where you've got the white privilege notions and everything is racist that has any dealings with any white people. I'm going to give it back to the speaker now.
That's an excellent question, though. And that's a question that ideally you wouldn't have to answer from up here, front to back, but that's a question that you would have dialogue with people. That's an educated question. It requires an educated response. You really need to step people through what I'm going to tell you. So when I get that from educated people, when you read the book, first of all, and this goes back to the book, the first 4 chapters are written purposely scholarly. So bear with it. I do take my time and step you through it, but there's some language in there that's purposely scholarly. And the reason why it's purposely scholarly is because of people that are going to bring up these things. They're going to bring up the dynamics of the Saul Alinsky model and community organizing. They're going to bring up Derek Bell. They're going to bring up liberation theology and all these crazy sort of demonic notions. But they're going to try to come across as if they got it. So what I did is I purposely made it a scholarly type writing, the first 4 chapters, so they know that, look, I'm not a dumb bumpkin. I'm an educated man. I got it. And so it's purposely written that way. Then after you get to chapter 5 and to the rest of the book, it accelerates. But the point is that what I do when people like that, I love it, because I say, okay, you got time for real, sincere dialogue here? They say, yeah. I say, okay, good. So the whole notions of racism as you see it has more to do with, there's a power structure, it's coming down on the black man, it's holding people back, it's a privileged structure, it's up here. And I said, so, is that right? And he said, yeah, that's exactly right. Now, what's up? And I say, well, it's ironic because when people talk about a power structure holding blacks down and this and that, and purport to be advocates for encouraging blacks and wanting only the best for blacks, yet at the same time, supporting people like Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement via Planned Parenthood. So, and they say, well, what do you mean? And so I break it down historically. I say, well, so here's the fact. The fact is your theology, what you believe as a power structure holding blacks down, is completely hypocritical because at the same time you're supporting Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, was started by Margaret Sanger, who, by the way, was a KKK supporter and was the women's KKK, and, by the way, hated blacks. And, by the way, says we're going to do Planned Parenthood because we want to exterminate blacks and we don't want them to know. And, by the way, who even until this day has 90% of all Planned Parenthoods in the country in black communities. Now, when you consider that you, my friend, and me, are only 12% of the population, and actually, if you say, half of the black population is men and half women, that's 6%. Now, actually, that's all women. If you look at childbearing age, 15 to 44, it's 3%. So how do you justify 90% of your entire business model going after a 3% demographic with no prejudice behind it? Doesn't make sense. That's racism blatant. And then I read the exact Margaret Sanger quotes, calling black reckless breeders, weeds and scourges of society, feeble-minded, all of that. And I say, yeah, you support that, bro. You support it. Well, I say, so if don't talk to me about the white power structure and this and that, and I tell the Black Lives Matter that, folks, that too. I say, black lives don't really matter to you. Well, what do you mean? I say, because if black lives really mattered, you'd be out in front of all Planned Parenthoods across the country. You'd be holding your rallies and riots right there in front of all Planned Parenthoods. And until you guys do that, you don't have a leg to stand on. You're hypocritical. You're liars. You're political activists. You're not about Black Lives Matter. If Black lives really matter, that's where you would start. And so, that's it. So what I try to do is I don't give them a leg to stand on. I try to take their feet off from first. If they answer that and they can get to me and they say, well, okay, you got it, all right. Then we can talk about white power structures. But I'm not going there with them until they can firmly see their own dereliction. And then we can have some conversations about how to correct that. So I try not to play the games with, because what will happen is they'll never admit. If I wanted to engage them and try to just defend my position without reframing the argument and giving them something that they have to defend, then we're going to always end up at an impasse anyway. So I'd rather get the impasse out on my side first, as opposed to, because if they're sincere, they'll have dialogue and they'll say, okay, all right, let me take that on. If they're not sincere, then they're going to try to keep punting and say, okay, well, you just part of the white power structure. The other thing that I do is, I was raised, so, when people try to say, well, Kev, you don't understand, you got a silver spoon in your mouth, and I tell them my background. I say, oh, no, bro. I was raised in Hunters Point in San Francisco. I know abject poverty. I died. My father was a runaway alcoholic all my formative years. I know what that's like. So, cut the crap. Don't give me that garbage. I know that side very well. I got a sociology degree from San Jose State. So, and I was very liberal in all my upbringing. all my, so I get it completely. The only thing that's going to bring us up is that we actually stand for truth. We actually stand for something. We actually self-actualize. We actually take the bull by the horns and start doing something. And so I try to encourage all my black and ethnic minority type friends to really embrace freedom and really embrace justice. So I don't know if I answered your question. I don't go too deep on their terms like that. I try to get them to reframe it on my terms. And this is a missed opportunity with most all Republicans. We enter into arguments and debates, and now I'm talking about talking heads in D.C. that are representing us. We enter into debates and arguments with liberals on their terms. They never reframe it. They don't put liberals on defense. So when we try to just answer on their terms, we always come off as defensive. Well, no, let's just flip the argument, reframe it, and have them have to address it. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll make to your point right there, a real quick comment about what Ben Carson is doing relative to Islam is exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Because he's taking the time, and he's sitting down with reporters, and he's reframing the entire conversation about Islam. And of course, the left hate it.
Yep.
Because he seized that moment to turn it around on them.
Exactly. He's done a great job with that conversation.
Yep.
And there are a few. Cruz did it one time. Rand did it one time with Debbie Wasserman Schultz several months ago when she was trying to jam him up about not being about women's rights. And he brought in, he says, well, why do you hate women so much? And she says, what do you mean? And then he says, well, you hate women, you hate kids. And she says, well, what? And he says, well, if a child was born, right out of the womb, are they actually a child or could they be aborted? At what point can they be aborted? Is what I think was what his question was. And she would not answer that question. He said, right up until it's delivered. But what if the child is just delivered? Would you abort it? And she couldn't answer the question. She did not answer the question. We need people to do that. We need to put liberals on defense. Actually, if we had the bright people, not Boehner or McConnell, but bright people that were our speakers, we would find that the liberal arguments are completely indefensible and in actual logic. They're completely indefensible. They're completely, and they're illogical. Excuse me? This doesn't even make any sense. So, but we just don't have bright people. We don't have bright people as talking heads for the Republican Party, and that's a problem. And I mean that with all due respect. But these guys are, really buffoonish. They're moronic. I've never seen such a lack of capacity to be able to engage people and talk about truth. So, yeah, okay. Still got time.
I'm a member of Judicial Watch, American Center for Law and Justice, John Birch Society.
Wow.
Thank God for these three organizations that have the money, talent, and they have the courage to go after these criminals.
That's right. Those are good organizations.
I pray that they will continue to do this.
That's great, and those are great organizations. And actually, that's a good segue to my thing I forgot to mention. So I'm with the Fredrick Douglass Foundation. The majority of our members, we are not a exclusive ethnic, black, or anything like that organization. The majority of our members are Tea Partiers. And so we have a membership. It's only $50 a year. But this is what we do. We go out to our communities, ethnic communities, and we try to get these pastors to just stand up for truth. We give them historical context. We give them Douglas' story. Douglas, of course, was a black, dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and he said it's because it's the only party of freedom and justice. And then we have these sort of debates. We try to bring them along. More importantly, we try to get them to get their parishioners to just vote and to vote biblical values. And so we do that kind of work. And we have in 2016, this is where it could be real important. Your membership would greatly help. We actually have a battleground strategy. So we're going to South Carolina, Ohio, Missouri, Florida, 8 battleground states. And we actually have ground troops, and we're going to deploy them in these communities. We're going to partner with churches, primarily the ethnic churches, but churches in those communities. And we're targeting specific communities where we lost a vote, but it was still within the margin. So Cuyahoga County and Ohio and some of the other counties that were still within the margin, 50,000, 70,000 votes, and we think we can swing them. Now, we'll have a lot of momentum on our side this time. We'll have a better candidate, hopefully. We're not going to have a pop cult figure like Obama. We're not going to have we don't have any blacks running on the liberal side this time. I do think that there was a guilt vote that was given to Obama, and of course, just the vote from all of the black community, just because. So we're going to have a lot of things on our side this time. And if Hillary is the nominee, she has so much baggage, she's not going to be able to pull the vote like Obama was able to pull. So, but the point is that we're targeting these areas. We got ground troops who are going hand to door, and we're going to get people turned on this vote in 2016. And we're going to do everything that we can. We're going to pull out all the stops. While it looks like we may have a great candidate and all that, we do have our work cut out for us. Let me remind you of a couple inconvenient truths. Since the McCain Obama vote in 2009, 2008, yeah, or whatever it was. 20, yeah. So since that McCain vote, we had 3 million less voters in the Romney Obama vote. So 3 million people voted less. 3 million less voters voted last time. So we have a deficit. Now we think that we can encourage people to come out. We're going to have a great candidate, and we anticipate we'll be able to do that. But the other deficit is Obama and La Raza are working together to normalize voting rights on new immigrants, and they expect 8.8 million new immigrants getting just in time to cast a vote for next November. And this is actually an initiative that the government our tax dollars are funding. There's money's given to La Raza, and they're going out with their Get Out the Vote campaign, and they're getting these newly immigrants to vote. So it's not a slam dunk, no matter how great our candidate is. We have to get out and do the work. So we're going to be working these battleground states to make sure. Now, there's some, the fraud in these battleground states is also way over the top. Ohio and Florida had several counties that had 120%. Did you guys hear that? You didn't hear? Let me here. So this will only take a minute, but you gotta see this. It's astounding. So True the Vote actually did the deal here, and I just want to bring it up real quick. Bear with me, and give you the actual stats, because these stats are scary actually. So hold on a second. I'm just bringing up my emails coming up. All right, here we go, and I just want to get the right email here and read it directly from True the Vote so you can see what we've got. Let me just do it this way. I just sent these stats to somebody last week. So, here we go. Okay. So, all right. In 59 voting districts in Philadelphia, Obama won 100% of the votes with not a single vote recorded from Romney. 59 voting districts in Philly. Not a single vote for Romney? In 21 districts in Wood County, Ohio, Obama recorded 100% of the votes, where the GOP inspectors were illegally removed from polling locations. In Wood County, Ohio, There were 106, 258 people who voted, but they only have 98,000 eligible residences. And so that's more than 100%, right? In St. Lucie County, Florida, they had 175 possible registered eligible voters, but 247,000 votes were cast. So almost 100,000 more in eligible voters. In Palm Beach, Florida, they had 141% voter turnout.
That's amazing.
In Ohio County, Obama won by 108% of the total number of eligible voters. So, fraud is rampant. We're going to have to fight that. We've got to neutralize that by getting more people on our side out. A lot of people don't know, but the church holds the key to America. Here's the inconvenient truth about churches. Of all the churches, especially evangelical churches, 50% of evangelical voters are registered. Only 50% of us. Of those that are registered, only 50% of them vote on any given election. So we've got a 25% turnout, basically, on any given election as evangelical voters. The good news is that leaves us about 35 million plus. That's just evangelical. That's not to consider, potential Jewish voters or other faiths, or, Catholics. It's just evangelicals. So we have 35 million plus that are just sitting. That all we have to do is activate them. And guess what? Those 35 million, they don't have a strong preference either way. Otherwise, they would be registered and they would be voting, right? So what we need to do is work with these churches, which we're doing, in these strategic battleground areas, and get those people activated. And so that's what we're doing at the Fredrick Douglass Foundation. It's $50 a year. You can help with that if you want to become a member. Also, I have these things, these gatherings I have in my house. I told you that we had Candy and Dr. Carson and his wife Candy about a month ago. These are private gatherings for Fredrick Douglass members. So if you're a member, you get a private invitation to come and meet people like that. We had Alan West, Tim Scott, Rand Paul, Dr. Carson. We've got Carly is trying to figure out some time. Santorum called me. He wants to come back through. We're still working on Cruz. Cruz made a promise of probably sometime late winter. So if you remember, you get those kinds of notifications as well. You get an opportunity to meet some of these people and spend some time. So anyway, I hope you, would consider that, and I'll have these in the back with the book signings. Unless you have any more pressing questions, I guess that's it. I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.